This podcast is brought to you by Toyn. Since 1942, Toyn has been building high-quality fire apparatus with a wide range of options that are customized for your unique needs. Toyn is built to take the call. To learn more, visit www.toyn.com.
You're like, all right, well, we need to mix and match these, right? Some do better than others. Different manufacturers do better than others. If everyone buys the same manufacturer, same type of vehicle, and that's all you have available, you're kind of pigeonholing yourself into what the operational capabilities of the entire area are. And that's what's nice where we operate and where I operated in College Park. There's all these different varieties. If you need an elevated waterway, that's a mid mount or a rear mount, we got it, right? You need a tiller truck to get into the tight area, we got it. You need a straight stick to get into somewhere that's tight, that is off road, that less weight, height restriction, we got that too. All right, welcome back to another episode of Fire Apparatus and Emergency Equipment, specifically the Apparatus Workshop. My name is Nick Wilbur. I have with me, as always, Win Slauch. This is our second episode, and today, since we talked about the working end of the engine, we're going to kind of talk about the working end of the ladder truck today. We've done some podcasts in the past with ladder trucks and ground ladder selection and towers versus aerials, and we're going to kind of jumble that all into one, kind of go over some highlights and cover some new material on really all the ins and outs of what it means to get a ladder truck to be operational and kind of set it up for success. So Wynn's going to kind of put me in the hot seat today and kind of grill me on some questions, and he's going to give his feedback too, and we're going to have a pretty good conversation and see where it leads us.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of right to not right, but kind of right to put you in a hot seat here, because I think that kind of your aspect in the back end of what we do in evaluating and determining the type of ladder is kind of puts you in the right spot to answer these questions. So, last week like you said, we talked about the working end of the pumper, and it ended up taking us not to just one specific point on a pumper to all many different points, the front bumper, the cross lays, or the rear. And I think the goal was to really concentrate on the rear, and we did, but it's hard to just pick one spot for that. So, as we dive into this, I think that we're going to see that there's more than one working end of the ladder truck. But with that being said, like, what would you describe as the working end of the ladder truck, or working ends of a ladder truck?
Yeah, I think for an engine, we talked about the hose bed, and I think it's the ladder truck. It's the ladders, right, in whatever configuration or location they are. And then past that, always, and we might as well just knock it out of the way now. The mission of the vehicle, or missions of the vehicle, right?
I knew that was coming up.
Yeah, I mean,
it has to.
That's going to be in every podcast, and we might as well start that in the opening remarks. But it kind of comes true with the ladder truck, because it can take on many different names or functions. College Park for us, it's truly a ladder truck. Ventilation, forcible entry, and ladders. That's like the name of the game. That's what it carries. And again, some lighting and overhaul stuff too, but that's pretty much our focus, right? In Arlington, we kind of switched towards that little bit of a quint model. So there's some pump stuff and there's a little bit of extrication stuff. Some have extrication trucks, and some are full-blown quints. So again, but that primary function, when you talk about training, when you talk about outfitting, is ladder truck. It's in the name ladder, right? So I think that's kind of the greatest place to start. And our deep dive into the selection of ground ladders and doing a good needs assessment for ground ladders that we did way back when. That's the deep dive that if you don't kind of know what we're talking about, to the place to kind of look at and head. And you can go back in the archives and check that one out. But I think looking at your area and sizing those ladders up matter, because that changes everything else. If you need a lot of ground ladders and you need to start taking those out of the rear torque box and locate them on the side of the vehicle, that changes what you're able to carry. And now maybe some of the other missions you wanted that vehicle to do just aren't possible. And we saw this within the last month or so at a department we were doing inspection, they had a quint and on a single axle, and that limits your ability to carry a 35-foot ground ladder, right? Especially two section, and so that starts taking up a lot of room. You go from 2 to 3 section, your width side to side expands out, and now you run out a lot of room to carry any other ladders. So I think again that's kind of the basis, but all those missions need to be accomplished, and if ventilation is a mission of the ladder truck, which it should be, then how are we going to put the equipment on there to make that work?
Right. And I wrote down, just a quick note here. Working on a ladder for me is the aerial itself, the waterway, the ground ladders, like you stated, and then the equipment. And you kind of alluded to all that in there. And I wholeheartely agree with you is that once you decide on the type of aerial that you're going to do, that the ground ladder selection is what should drive the rest of the truck. But how would you get to the decision of what type of apparatus or what type of ladder truck to buy? Are we going to buy a 75-foot quint? Are we going to buy a single axle 100-foot? Are we going to go with a big 125 or a mid-mount tower versus a rear mount tower? What kind of, because again, when you look at the working end of those things, that main aerial, we have to get that box checked off first before we can really decide to do the rest of it. So with your fleet evaluations and area studies and things like needs assessments, what kind of drives you into one type of ladder or the other?
I think you talk about the ladder up top, and that's hugely important. I think before we even get to there, there's kind of 3 questions we need to ask ourselves, and one is height and weight restrictions, right? Because you might want that mid-mounted tower ladder, rear-mounted tower ladder, and at a bay height of 10.5 or 11 foot, that rear-mounted tower ladder starts kind of dissipating out there, right? We've run into a lot of departments that have basements underneath their apparatus bays, and the tower ladder in general kind of becomes non-existent topic, or even a quint, because the weight just exceeds the ability for that floor, and that's just not a possibility. And then again, around your first due area, that height restriction, we saw pictures way back in the day, and I guess it wasn't really that long ago, within the last 10 years, of a ladder truck at an airport that struck an overhang and damaged a bucket, right? And so airport, your first due area is somewhat defined, I guess. And so if you have lower areas there, then maybe that's not the right fire truck, because that's a huge hazard and a really expensive fix. So I think that's a first key to kind of start guiding you in that direction. We've said it before, what your neighbors have, right? Again, some studies we've done, hey, we've always had a tower, we need a tower, we're going to get a tower. And you look at every fire truck or ladder truck around them is a tower ladder. And you're like, all right, well, we need to mix and match these, right? Some do better than others. Different manufacturers do better than others. If everyone buys the same manufacturer, same type of vehicle, and that's all you have available, you're kind of pigeonholing yourself into what the operational capabilities of the entire area are. And that's what's nice where we operate, and where I operated in College Park. There's all ththese different varieties. If you need an elevated waterway, that's a mid-mount or rear mount, we got it, right? You need a tiller truck to get into the tight area, we got it. You need a straight stick to get into somewhere that's tight, that is off-road, that less weight, height restriction, we got that too. And so I think that's kind of starts painting the picture where you need to head. And then, sizing your area up and where you need to reach. And that's both with the aerial ladder and the ground ladders, both. I know we had this discussion in Arlington a little bit. If you're talking about a tower ladder and you're trying to add a Bangor 45, 30, or 50-foot ladder in there, those two conversations don't really go hand in hand, right? Especially if you're talking mid-mounted tower ladder. So I think that can kind of start steering you down a direction of what that ladder complement generally looks like, right? Am I carrying a 45 or not is really the start of that conversation. And do I need to carry a lot of ground ladders and number? And if that, that starts going towards tiller truck, right? So you start kind of scoping that conversation that way. You have a 38 foot to 45-foot long firehouse, well, then a tiller truck's not going to happen, right? That's not enough room to back that tiller truck in. So again, I think a lot of those things kind of start shaping you into that direction. And again, it's really looking at your need, your neighbors, and kind of really having that holistic conversation. The biggest takeaway of all of that information is sit down with a blank piece of paper to start your conversation. It's not what we had. It's not what has worked in the past, right? Because you could be doing something wrong for 100 years and it's not right anymore then as it is today. And if you don't look at it, you're not going to see it. And number two is everybody's area is changing. There's not very many areas that haven't changed in the last 30 years since the last purchase of a ladder truck. So what's changed and how can we kind of purchase this vehicle to work better in our area? So that's kind of the part.
Yeah, I think, again, I think you can see just in that little conversation there how you can't just start with one aspect of the truck. You have to look at the truck as a whole. And like you said, you might say, hey, I need a mid-mount tower ladder. But on the other hand, I have, 4 and 5 story, garden apartment complexes that I have no access to, whether it's a pond, it's built into a golf course or a pond or a community like we saw down in Southern Delaware the other day, where you just don't have the access to it. And that starts to mold that decision-making process there and what and how you're going to, provide the services that are needed. And again, it involves that. I think, people forget that it involves the looking around at your neighbors and to what they can do and what they can help you with. And it's not just we need to put more ground ladders on this ladder truck because the fire company next door has 228 feet of them. We need to have 229. It doesn't work like that, right? And it's building the ladder complement out, including the aerial device as to what works for that area that you have and what's in it or what you need to cover. So I think that whole thing just opens itself up to this big thing. Well, like you said, you need to start with a blank piece of paper. So I think that's a key. What continuing on with working, the working ends of the ladder. And like I said, I feel like we're going to jump all over this a little bit, kind of like we did last time. But, not only do you have to look at the ladder itself, the ground ladders, but you have to look at your desire to flow water with it as well, right? Is that a desire? And then I got another question just popped up, and I think this question that popped in my head was the one where I really, really wanted to go. So let's talk about that and a little bit about the weight rating of the ladder in a little bit. But let's talk a little bit about the working end being when we're going defensive with this ladder type, and or do we even want one in that case? Is it worthwhile to have one? I guess, and is what I'm kind of getting at here. So.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question. That's kind of the next one in progression, really, if you look at it too, because the money expenses there, right? We know, like on a straight ladder truck, a ballpark just from the hip, today's pricing, because tomorrow's pricing is going to be different than yesterday, and a week from now it'll be even more different. By the time this thing goes up there, I'll probably be wrong in my estimate, but. $60,000, I think, is probably about the ballpark you're going to be for that pre-piped waterway versus, less than 10 for, the hose and all the rest of the equipment for the non-pre-pipe. The first thought process is training and speed, and I think that's a legitimate ask or, thing that you should evaluate is how fast can we get this up and how fast do we need to get it up? And for an example there to paint the picture, if I'm downtown, everyday USA built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, everything's tied together, shared basements. I have a well-advanced fire, not a lot of staffing. Mutual aid around is volunteer or combination or even career where the staffing numbers aren't great and they're coming from a distance away. That tower ladder with the waterway is probably pretty important, right? Because otherwise I'm going to lose the whole block if I don't get that aggressive, not even defensive, but even offensive weapon in service and start getting that large caliber stream of water in there. So that
happened in my town last year. So we've got a nice big hole in the middle of town right now.
Yeah, I mean that's a concern for a lot of these these places. The other side of it is, access, speed, things like that. With the waterway, if I have these 1-story, 2-story buildings, we saw this on University of Maryland campus in College Park. A lot of these buildings, our access is right tight up against it. You get maybe 5 to 10 feet of extension. That's not enough to get that pinned waterway out of the way.
Right.
So we just ran into a lot of issues. Yeah. And so, here we are 4 feet off the parapet. That's another 3 feet. Instead of the 3-foot parapet, now we have a 7-foot drop. And that just becomes very difficult to operate around. And then use, right? How many times are you using it compared to how many calls? So for our ladder truck, we were over 400 calls a year probably. And twice a year we were using the pre-pipe ladder pipe. To me, again, the cost versus how long we're keeping the ladder truck and how many times it's getting in the way, that really didn't make any sense for us. And so we opted to not have it in there. But I think staffing plays a huge role in that, right? If you don't have the people and you want quick, large water, that could be a pretty deep consideration. And then to kind of dive right into your next topic with weight.
Well, before we get to the weight, I mean, unless the weight's going to, tie into the waterway, and if it is, stop me. But, I think, the waterway discussion goes away if you want to have a mid-mount tower ladder. Like, you're not going to buy a mid-mount.
Oh, yeah.
Without, or even a rear mount tower ladder. You're not going to buy a bucket without a waterway on it, right? That's just,
right.
That's pointless to some extent, right? But when you get into the rear mount aerial, and you gave good reasons not to, potentially not have it. If your buildings are, if you're in a tight area, you have, 2, maybe 3-story buildings where you're not going to be able to get the waterway out of the way, then that becomes a real thing. The other thing too is when you're building a tiller truck is removing the area or the waterway off of it can allow you to shorten a tiller truck up to fit it into an older firehouse, or to fit it in a firehouse, or even just shorten the overall length of it up, which would allow you to get it into even tighter places depending on what your area is you're dealing with. And we're going through that now at work, where we're trying to get that thing as short as possible. And there's some give and take there, right? But through training, and there's tons of departments, I'm not going to throw names out, but there's departments out there that have been through this. Reach out to them, question why. Hey, how did you get around, with your stakeholders, how did you get around taking this waterway off of it? What did you do? And I know some of the people we ask, they send us videos. They can put their non-pre-piped waterway in service faster than they can put a pre-piped waterway in service in a lot of cases. By the time you climb to the end of the ladder, flip the thing to the water flow mode, not the rescue mode. And, through practice, you can even that stuff out. But the gains that you get by shortening that overall length up, where again, sometimes it's lower in the height of the ladder without on a straight stick. You might be able to lower that thing down a couple more inches. Same thing with the rake of the ladder, which would increase the visibility for the driver, the tillerman, in a tiller truck. All that stuff kind of plays into why that $60,000 option may not be the best option for you on a straight stick ladder, whether it's a rear mount or a mid mount or a tiller truck, or even a mid mount in some cases. But so I just throw that in there, and then we can dive into weight right now. And
yeah, I think you hit a ton of good points, and I think that tiller truck, I would probably go towards the realm of the mid-mounted tower ladder, right? If you're doing mid-mounted tower ladder, you're probably going for that, flowing water and having that platform to work off of. If you're going with a tiller truck, you're going for tight, maneuverable, access, speed, all of those things. That waterway, I don't think fits into that. And again, there's exceptions to every rule out there, but I would lean much more, much harder into that non-pre-pipe waterway. Again, you have that guy riding right next to the tip of the aerial to help set everything up. That's kind of, pretty much begs to not have a waterway. And again, you said the height, right? Dropping that height down, the travel height to maybe give more visibility, the length for drivability. I mean, there's a lot of things that improve with that decision. So yeah, I agree. I think the waterway itself, right, just hanging off the aerial adds some weight. And now, we're going to, talk about this a little bit and not get too deep into the numbers and the figures. Because first of all, I'm not an engineer and not that smart and can describe it in the most prestigious manner. But to just kind of give it down and dirty, I think, when you start talking aerial and tip loading, you have to be very careful and look at those charts, right? And so I think, so first of all, the NFPA, right after the 90s there, they started, 91 to be specific, started breaking it up into different poundage. So there's 250 pounds, 500, 750, 1,000, and then there's some 1250s out there. That's the range that you have. And some manufacturers will say you have X number of pounds at the tip, water flowing, no water flowing, any angle, any elevation. Some will say if you have water flowing, then we reduce to half. So instead of, let's say, 500 pounds as a tip, when you flow water, you have 250. And then some will say, well, at this degree, this elevation, you have this much, this degree. And then if you flow water, there's a different load chart. So it's not a standard way to say, hey, I have a 750 pound tip load. That could vary across the board on, I have a 750 pound tip load, flowing water or not, in any elevation, any extension, and any degree. Or I have a 750 pound tip load when it's up at 70 degrees, no extension and no water flowing. And now if I flow water and I bring up below zero, now maybe it's only 250 pounds or no pounds at the tip because we're down below that zero. So I think that's an important thing to look at, that one number they put on the sales flyer doesn't necessarily mean it's across the board. And that's okay, right? Because if you look at physics, 500 pounds at the tip without water flowing shouldn't necessarily be the same as 500 pounds at the tip with water flowing, right? There's numbers in there that we're not getting the full story necessarily. Now, is that an easy number to remember? Absolutely, right? So I think that's where it all stems from, is the ease of use. At 2 o'clock in the morning, you're not going to make a mistake. But I think that kind of goes into what the capacity is. You take off a waterway, a couple hundred pounds, pre-pipe waterway, that doesn't change your aerial load rating at all. Well, again, that's a difference, right? You're going to have more capacity because you're not flowing water, and that weight that was on that aerial is not there anymore. But again, in some of those calculations, some manufacturers don't change those numbers. So again, it's kind of being an informed consumer and kind of looking at the full picture. You're probably going to have more speed, more safety factor for sure, right? If I'm, trying to put 500 pounds to the tip and I go to rescue somebody and another somebody comes to the window, now I'm not as worried because there's not an extra 800 pounds that would have been there. Again, not an engineer, not saying that you should go out and overload any ladder trucks, right? That's my covering statement there. But it's very important to understand that there is some fluff built in there. And no one will tell you how much, and that's fair because we're firemen and we would break it in a heartbeat. So, but there's other factors outside of just that waterway and the tip loading that, all that stuff kind of combines into one conversation to an extent.
Yeah, and I think that, from a specification point of view here, I think people, sometimes people try to over-engineer their fire trucks on the fireground side of it, whether it's let's get the hose bed as low as possible, but we want the shortest truck as we can, but then we want the cross lays low too. Well, then that's going to extend my pump panel because, I got to have room for all the valving and plumbing in there. But so you got to be careful by over-engineering that process in the specification. And on the ladders, that comes into, all right, well, if I go with a 250 pound tip load ladder, I can have a 12-foot jack spread. And, and then obviously it's going to increase up from there. But you have to, again, look at and evaluate your district. If you are a suburban or a rural fire company and a majority of your reach is out, then a 250 pound tip load may be out of the window. 250 pound tip loads are designed for cities that are going straight up, right? When they got to try and fit in between little teeny streets. I mean, I'm 250 pounds. You put me out at the end of a aerial ladder way out there, then somebody else jumps on it. Well, we just overloaded that tip load, or I can't have anybody else coming up the ladder with me in that situation because, again, we're going to overload the aerial. Now, again, obviously there's safety things built in there, but you have to be careful that you're not trying to over-engineer and say, oh, I want this 12-foot jack spread because it's going to be better for me. When in reality, you need to have that longer jack spread because, again, you may need to have 2 or 3 people on the tip of your aerial at 0 degrees because of the reach of the ladder versus being in the city or something like that where you can be up high. And again, there's some other things that we've done where maybe we try to engineer the tip load into the package that we want it to be in. Whereas, hey, it's a 750-pound tip load at 16 feet. But if I only make the outriggers come out and we do this at the factory, so it's engineered into it, well, I'm going to drop my 750-pound tip load down to a 500-pound tip load, but I'm also going to take 2 feet off the overall setup width of my truck. So again, that tip load, you have to be careful not to try to over-engineer that in the beginning, and think about that as again, that whole package and the mission of the vehicle and where that vehicle is going to be operated.
I think it goes back to training too. You're absolutely right, because those ladders are gonna look and feel differently. Not look more so, but when you're using them, there might be some sort of visual cue, and when you're on them, you're gonna feel differently. And we had that conversation in Arlington after this, the switch from 750 to 500 and a different type of ladder built, I guess, how the ladder was built. A lot of people, oh, it's too flexible, I don't like it. Well,
I just heard it the other day.
Yeah, and again, like that's a somewhat legitimate gripe, right? That's a change, but I say what I mean, and I'm a little blunt sometimes, and my response usually is train more, right? You're just not comfortable on that. Get comfortable with the equipment. That just means now that you're not going to use that equipment how it's designed to be used. 500 pounds should be on that fire truck. You don't feel comfortable with you as being 200 pounds, then how are you going to feel comfortable bringing somebody else on that ladder and making a rescue, right? So there's kind of an issue there. And again, is that a specification we need to do something different, or is that just a training and comfortability level, kind of issue? Yeah. And that's serious stuff, right? I mean, we've talked to people that said they want a tower ladder because their members are getting older and they don't want to climb. Does your area need a tower ladder? Maybe not. And again, it goes back to that jack spread, right? We're looking at minimum 500 at the basket or the bucket. So that jack spread is just going to be more. There's more weight on the aerial inherently. Right. Most are 750, 1,000, 1,250 pound tip loads. That jack spread is going to be bigger. So can your first two handle that? And then again, one other thing on top of all that, can you short jack or not? And again, is that something that you're able to do? A lot of people say, oh, I'll just short jack. Well, that's great. But if you have power lines or things that you need to kind of get around, right? A telephone pole where you need to kind of come up and around the other way to hit the structure, well, then you have to have that non-working side out to be able to rotate over, right? So that's another thing. Technology, there's some manufacturers that offer differing jack spreads, and you'll get different tip loads based on your jack spread. There's some that how far your jack comes out will limit your reach with your aerial. There's all of these different, doohickeys, we'll say, out there and technological pieces to consider. But at the end of the day, I want to go into the room and say, all right, here's my tallest building. I need to get this high. Here's generally how far my reach is. And then from there, we can say, all right, my roads or my streets are, most streets are 10 to 12 feet from center line over to the side. So I have, 2-lane roads. So I got about 20, 22 feet to work with there. My sidewalk or my parking spot is about 8 feet, can get cut down to like 7.5, 7 feet if they want to get really tight. Do I have a bike lane? What's my sidewalk? 4, 6 feet? What's my how far is my sidewalk from my building? And again, we go from the tightest area to the non-tightest area. We kind of get some of those numbers down there. And now we have some factual evidence to show up to the room. Not, hey, I want this bright, shiny, biggest thing that can do anything. Or like you said, I want the smallest, tightest thing that I can ever get, because neither one of those might be the right one for your area.
They might not fit properly, right?
Right. Absolutely. And you get that complaint, which again, a legitimate complaint. If you have a 250-pound tip load and you're going out 100 feet and that's how you use it all the time, and you're only, 20, 30 feet off the ground, it's going to be a little bit of a ride when you get out there. And when you get two, people coming off a roof, or someone gets off as you're climbing up, you might get a little spring action going on there. So, and again, what is that non-pre-piped waterway? Can you even flow water with someone at the tip? I would recommend not anyway, but
And the technology thing there, brings up a point. Like, the most ladders now are going to be multiplex. They're going to stop you from doing whatever it is that you want to do if it's not set up properly, if it's not in its right, operating envelope. But again, like you said, if you have to come up or down to get under a wire, up and over, and you can't get the jacks out the whole way, then you might not be able to, the truck might stop you from doing that. And then now you're tempted to override it, which, maybe because of training, that you're capable of doing it. But again, when you override that truck, you own it, right? You've just gone past the parameters that the manufacturer set. So if you had something wrong and it's out and it tips itself over, then that's on you at this point. Again, we see that less at this point, but it's still possible. And when you don't understand, or you try to build a truck that's not meant to do what it needs to do, then you're going to run into those issues. So
I think I took a note here and I wrote it down because I forgot it like 3 times as we've been talking. So I wanted to write it down so I remember. But, ISO, NFPA, they generally play into this too a little bit. And so, ISO is not the end all be all necessarily, but it is a way to be, to grade a fire department. And insurance companies, not all, but, some insurance companies, most insurance companies use them. And so one of their things that they look at is that you can reach the tallest building in your response area up to 100 feet. So a lot of these people getting 75-foot quints, there's a chance that you're not able to reach the roof of the building. And so getting a ladder truck, you might not actually get full credit for that ladder truck. Another thing is they require a 35-foot or longer ladder. Again, these are partial credit things that you would lose, but those 2 things right there as an agency, that shows the importance of sizing up your area and making sure you have the right thing for the job. And to not have a 35 is kind of going against just their general basic recommendation. That kind of speaks volumes to an extent. Again, this isn't a blanket statement that everybody needs to have a 35 all the time, but it goes back to the general things of a ladder truck. If you have a ladder truck and if it doesn't have a ladder up top, first of all, it's not a ladder truck, but some people might call something other than that a ladder truck. Who knows? If it doesn't have a 35 or greater, you might not be a ladder truck, right? If it doesn't have some sort of saws for access and ventilation, not just ventilation, also access, right? Probably not a ladder truck. A set of irons. I've been and seen some quints and ladder trucks that don't even have a Halligan bar and an axe married together in a fashion to get the job done. There wasn't even a Halligan bar to be found on that as a special service. I had to go and cry in the hotel room a little bit after that inspection. To be honest, I was visibly upset that you could have a ladder. It's just like not having ground ladders on it, right? Like it just, some of this stuff just doesn't. Again, it goes back to education and we can kind of dive into that the other side of the ladder truck or special service. And we hit on some of those points for the rescue engine, how to not even just the extrication point, but just going over into that special service or service company realm. And this is your time to shine. And numerous places we go, and they use it for the ladder up top, and they have the ISO credit for the ladders in the back. And you open up compartments, and there's nothing in there. And then the other side of that is you go in there, and there is zero room in there, and that thing is overweight. And so we need to find that happy medium somewhere to load it with what it needs.
Before we get into the equipment part of it, let's go back to the back of the truck and the ground ladders, the true, real, backbone of the ladder truck, city service truck, whatever you want to call it. Again, they were all kind of invented at one point to carry ground ladders to the fire scene. So obviously, that's kind of where I'm going to go. I think once you decide that the type of ladder you want, you need to have the manufacturer be able to build that ladder complement around what you need, or the ladder tunnel, essentially, or whole ladder truck to that point around the complement that you need. So with the new updated NFPA 1900, we know now that they have removed the requirement for ground ladders, moved it back to an annex where it's a recommendation and not a requirement. So how do you, kind of explain the necessary need to have ground ladders on your fire truck, and how you can allow that, the fact that they've removed that from the standard to, or not removed it, but moved it to a recommendation, how you can't allow that to affect your decision making while you're building a ladder truck?
Yeah, I think it's funny too because I didn't always know that ISO required a 35-foot extension ladder on there, and now you go around the showroom floor or FDIC or any of the other major shows out there, and you think to yourself as you look, there's 135, 124, and two regular straight ladders. Well, if you start adding that up, that meets the NFPA complement of ground ladders and also the ISO's exact ground ladder complement, right? Well, so manufacturers are built into that minimum standard. You remove that minimum standard, now any demo vehicle out there, right? Any stock unit, they don't really have any guidance, and so what they're going to do is just keep doing what they're doing, or the second technology changes, or the EPA when they add something else to the ladder truck, or this new fancy gizmo or gadget comes out, the one place they're going to look for room is that torque box, right? Or that they're going to kind of start trying to steal stuff away from. And again, there's no requirement to stop them. So it really becomes important for the customer to be an informed customer. And it's knowing what the standard was, knowing that was a minimum standard, right? It wasn't what should be done. It was a minimum standard. And I think, to give them a little bit of leeway and not a lot, because I don't necessarily agree with what they did. It is a minimum standard, so they can't really tell anybody what they have to carry. The problem is you build a ladder truck without ladders in it. Again, it goes back to the things that a ladder truck should have on it to be a ladder truck. Don't call it a ladder truck at that point. Don't get the ISO credit. Don't fake somebody out to say it's something that it's not. It's an engine with a big tall thing up top. That's fine if that's what you want to design, but that is not a ladder truck, right? That's not what the expectation of the other fire departments are or the public is when that thing shows up.
Yeah.
And so I think, for the purchaser or the customer, they really need to understand what their area needs. Again, go back to that podcast on the ladder assessment, the ground ladder assessment. A ton of information in there, but really the tallest ladder that you need should reach any window or anywhere in your first due within reason, right? If you don't have a way to get to a window, then there has to be a solution. And it ties back to the last couple weeks and the last year at work in Arlington, right? We're working on a floor above rescue system for rope because we have a lot of areas we can't reach with ladders. So what's the solution, right? Got to find some way to get not even the people, the citizens out, but us as firefighters, right? If I go up there and I do an aggressive search and I get cut off from the stairs, how am I getting out? And if you can't answer that question for the windows in your area, your response area, this is the time to solve it with the ladder truck, right? And however that design looks like, with whatever ladders you need to make that happen, that there's just no excuse to let that one go or not evaluate that. Build a ladder truck, get it shipped, get it delivered, and have somebody not have access or egress out and have a firefighter lose his life. That to me is just unacceptable. And unfortunately, with that standard being removed, there's just less guidance in the way to help fire departments obtain that.
And I think that, we understand why the standard was removed. I mean, we've had it explained on podcasts here on this, but we've had it explained. But so, I mean, the intention is good, right? If you're a fire company that doesn't have a lot of money, you just had your ground ladders tested. And that's part of the stipulation is that the ground ladders that you're going to put back on the ladder truck have to be tested within a year. But again, if you're going to keep the ground ladders off your older ladder truck that you're replacing, then there's a little bit of leeway there. And that's kind of the reason behind it, is to give a little bit more of that leeway to the fire company. So you don't have to spend another $25,000, $30,000, $50,000 on ground ladders that you already own. So as long as the customer or the specker understands that, then, that's okay. But if you're going to go, and it's going to happen, we've already seen it where you take the torque box and there's half the torque box now, and now there's a slide out tray in it for struts or things like that. It's going to happen where somebody's going to build a ladder truck without the ladders on it and just say, oh, we don't need it. We only need the 75-foot, ladder on top, or the 100-foot ladder on top. It is going to happen. At some point, it's just the nature of the game. But, again, there is a reason as to why that happened. But you have to, again, look at your needs and assess what you need and make sure that you can provide the service for that. So with that, and kind of staying still on ground ladders, but moving to equipment, how could the need for more ground ladders affect your storage for equipment? I mean, if we get into side stacks, things like that, obviously, again, you're evaluating that whole process of what we're going to do on a fire ground. But what trumps one versus the other, do you think?
That's a huge a decision that individual people are going to have to kind of make for their area, because we talked about this with the engine, the rescue engine, pumper, tanker, ladder truck, every fire truck out there. Outside of the mission, you then have to give and take, right? What's the most important? And it's not, we definitely covered this in the last episode in Rescue Engine 2, that priority list, right? What's the most important thing? Ladder up top, number 2, ground ladders, number 3, ventilation, number 4, right? And now we can start checking those boxes, and we start writing out what the needs are in each category. All right, we want, 17 chainsaws and 15 circular saws on there. Well, that's the number 5 category, and our ground ladders are now taking up more space. Now, okay, we're outside the torque box. We need to now side stack on one side or the other, or both sides, possibly. Compartment space is now going away. Now, because ventilation is that number 3 category, instead of carrying those 30-something saws, now we're going to have to cut that number back, right? Because that was not as high of a priority as anything else as the ground ladders were. And so things to kind of consider with that, we did it in Arlington. It was, drawn on a Quran, like a kid with a Quran. And I know I did it, so I know people laughed at it because I also laughed at it too. But when we were, conceptualizing, like, we still need compartment space, but we need more ladders. How do we do that? And you start looking at 2-section or 3-section ladders, right? Taking a 16-footer, and instead of being 16 feet on the side of a fire truck, you bring it down to, the 9.125 feet that it is bedded as a 16-foot 2-section ladder. Now, we lose that little bit of space and thickness, but the rest of that, 7 feet we've gained now in full high compartments. So I think it's the size of the ladder and how can we kind of maneuver that, right? Once you take a 35-foot ladder out of that rear torque box and you put it on a side stack, you've lost the entire side of the ladder truck, right? 28-footer, you've lost less, but almost the entire side of the ladder truck. You start shrinking that down to a 24, 16 2-section. Now we start gaining some of that ladder truck back. And again, knowing your ladders and how they bed together, 28 and a 16, 28 2-section and a 16 straight are the same length, right? 14 and a 24. That's why they're married together, right? 35 or 30, I guess, and the 18, and then the 35 and the 20, right? Those are kind of the marrying pairs. So we want to kind of keep those ladders paired together and keep as many of those longer ladders we can in the torque box. And again, once we overflow from the torque box, that goes to that side mounted ladder. You start talking about a tower ladder, really the side stack ladders kind of goes away, right? A mid-mounted tower ladder, that's not really a conversation to have anymore, and you're pretty limited on your ground ladder storage. 235s, 228s, and 316s, still very well in the realm of possibility to get back there in most of those mid-mounted towers. So fair compliment. But again, we start talking about that 45, that 50, we kind of start changing that conversation. And so I think all those things kind of play in. And if I want to carry, again, like I said, extrication equipment, saws, a lot of fans, we have big industrial or big open spaces, and I want 4 or 5 positive pressure ventilation fans, well, that's going to then take space, right? And usually, a bigger, higher CFM fan's not going to fit under a whole bunch of stacked ladders in that small compartment. So where is it going to go? So again, that how many can I side stack, where they can be located, and what else I need to carry really plays into that. So that ranked list will help kind of keep that in order, that order of priority. And again, just that back torque box, making sure you can fit as many as you can in there. Right. Go ahead.
You said there's 2 things I wrote down on there, and you finished up kind of with it there, that I think it's really key that you start with that blank piece of paper and you you rank your priorities of what you need, because again, that will help you drive the design of your ladder truck. And when you get, like you said, you get to it, well, we want, 27 stalls on here, but we also need these ground ladders. Well, then, all right, we can come right back up and say, all right, well, we need to start checking some of these things off, and we're not going to get all that stuff. And I think if you don't have that piece of paper, again, you go in there, you should have that big piece of easel and, hey, these are what we want, and then start backing it off to get what you truly need. And that's key. The other thing that I always drove me, especially with side stacks, is you see big departments, and on their side, they're putting a 35 or a 28. Big, 28's not horrible, but 35 is a big, heavy ladder, especially if you get into a 3-section 35, which you'll see. And then, that thing gets up on the outriggers. Well, it gets hard to get off. It might be doable in a paid department where you have a dedicated crew and you train with it. But if you're in a volunteer fire department, you got to think about, hey, maybe I need to move the smaller ladders to the outside. Maybe I put 16s on the outside, the 24 we bring out of the torque box. And then I can put my bigger ladders in the torque box that are a little bit easier to slide off versus trying to reach up high and pull them down. So again, I think that a lot of people miss that sometimes. The other thing, and before we get into equipment, because I do think we do need to talk a little bit about that. And maybe we don't get there, but the ability to manipulate the ladders that you're buying. And a lot of the manufacturers have the ability to, with CAD drawings, fit them in the right spots and make the, torque boxes, or make the brackets kind of marry together so that, a 28 and a 35 might slide together above each other and tighten that thing up. The other thing, and I think we mentioned this before, is you don't have to go with one manufacturer ladder. You need to look at what's going to fit and go between, a duo safety and an alkalite or a wooden ladder, whatever. But you can mix
Tough day today for you, man.
Oh man, mix match ladders to get the complement that you want. So again, a thicker or a wider beamed ladder may not fit in the torque box in the space that you have, but you could drop to a different manufacturer where they're not quite as wide, and then fit those ladders in there.
I think the custom ladders too, right? I mean, there's people
exactly. You can do custom ladders, right?
Yeah.
So if your torque box doesn't fit, a 24-inch wide ladder, you could, again, you're going to pay for it, but you can have that cut down to a 23, a 22 and a half, or whatever, lengthwise too. If the space that you're trying to fit won't fit a 28-foot ladder, you could cut it down to a 27-foot ladder. Again, you need to make sure that that's going to fit your overall, outcome of what you're looking for. Do you need that extra foot? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But again, you might be able to manipulate that just a little bit and get a smaller, specially built ladder to fit into your torque box and still meet your needs in that situation. So, again, there's lots of ways to work around the problems if you ask the right questions. And I think that's key, is you have to be willing to ask the right questions.
I think one thing to hit right now too, because you kind of were talking about the torque box and making it tight. If you have more than 4 hooks in the back of your torque box, you're doing it wrong. And it's a very bold and general blanket statement, but I'm going to make it because I just see it so many times. There's 12 hook spots in the back there, and you're carrying 6-foot hooks in the back of the torque box, taking up room where your longer ladders can go. The fire truck's about 8 feet wide. So if you want a 6-foot hook, you can slide it up and down on the side of the fire truck, or in a little tunnel through the fire truck side to side, and it's going to fit just fine. Right.
And I think that's another point that maybe you can leverage the removal of the ladders from the standard into the annex, is that maybe and you look at everything else you have on a fireground. Maybe I don't need to put that 10-foot attic ladder that takes up 3 inches of space all the way around. Maybe I don't need to put that on my ladder truck. Maybe I can get that off one of the 4 or 5 engines that are on the fireground. It's the same thing. Most engines are carrying 24s and 14s. Do I really need to duplicate that on my ladder truck if I'm going to have 4 more of those ladders on the fireground somewhere else? So again, it's looking at that big picture and maybe not duplicating what somebody else is going to have. And again, now NFPA gives you a little bit more leeway there.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't need that attic ladder. Am I going to be the only ladder truck on the scene where I need to, have that ladder? Do I have the ability to call for help from somewhere else, or will something else allow me to get to that position without it? So
those combination ladders, right? They require the attic ladder and the combination ladder, and sometimes that combination ladder can cover both, right? And that could be fit somewhere else. I mean, it could be used to get over a fence, get up into that, that roof line or attic area. It's honestly more sturdy and wider than the attic ladder is. It's a better working platform. So again, you're right, that could take the place. We're kind of duplicating it out there, and that one little square there, the one hook, you wouldn't be shocked at how many times we're sitting down and trying to figure out where those things can go or get nestled to get out of the way to get more room. I mean, that's
right.
If you're doing the ladder tunnel right, that's going to be that tight where you're trying to figure out how it's going to look and again how it plays out. Like what ladders should go on what side of the ladder tunnel, right? Or 35s on the outside, because then if you angle the truck, there's more room. Are they on the inside, right? There's anything else in the spec. If it's a quint, where's the overflow for the pump in the front, right? That can knock out space. And not going to say any stories or give away any tips, but if someone tells you it doesn't fit, you can, in nice clothes and no shoes on, climb into a ladder tunnel with a tape measure and a flashlight and prove them wrong. Not that I've ever done that or that's ever happened, but just hypothetically, right? So that's all stuff that you have to kind of consider when you're speccing a fire truck out. That back end. The other thing is a little giant. I've seen a bunch of little giants being nestled in the rear torque box, or those combination ladders, and it's like, again, another thing I want to shed a tear over. It's very disappointing because again, that's the prime real estate to store those longer ladders, and that just shows that you don't think you need them, or I mean, you don't think you need them because I could probably go there and tell you that you probably do need more of those ladders. So, yeah.
Yep. So I mean, we got a little bit of time left. I don't know if we want to get into the equipment end of it. Again, I think that you can build into that a little bit, but I think that where we're at with the ground ladders, the aerial ladder, the waterway, I think those are really, when you really talk about the working end of the ladder, those are what we're really thinking about. The other stuff are add-ons. Again, you have to think about it on that blank piece of paper when you start. These are the things that we want to do, and make sure that you don't overload your truck on it. And I guess that that is going to bring up a good point. And it's another thing I think we talk about all the time is we have to factor all of that equipment into our overall weight of the apparatus. And I think that might be a good spot to finish up on here is, again, we need to think about all that extra stuff that we're going to think about putting on here and how it's going to affect the overall build. Are we going to overload our fire truck? Did we make sure that we gave the manufacturer the correct weight of equipment that we want to add to it? Are they just taking the NFPA minimum, and are we over the NFPA minimum? Are we under the NFPA minimum? And then will that affect, the axles that we're going to put on it? Can we drop an axle to increase our ride quality, or do we need to go with a bigger axle? And I think that that's key.
I was going to bring up the underloading as we were talking. We've talked about this a couple times, pretty recently about what's the minimum weight and underloading and things like that. And we learned that at College Park. We put a lot of ground ladders on there, and that's the weight that's calculated into the fire truck. You take the 2,500 pounds of loose equipment that NFPA says to build into the fire truck, into the ladder truck. That's great. Well, then if whatever axle was put on there when they started the engineering, if you're not paying attention, that could actually, allot you 4,000 pounds. And then you come back to the firehouse and you're putting fans and saws on there, and that's really it. You might only have 1,000 pounds. And now, so we have this huge gap of weight. And so I think that's kind of the point we can kind of wrap this thing up. And I think the parting words on that, as far as equipment, and I think, we could go way into depth on more equipment stuff, and that's definitely another podcast or another conversation for another day. But just the overall 100-foot view, not even 1,000-foot, but 100-foot view. of equipment is, what's the purpose of this thing showing up? And again, I talked about there being no equipment on some ladder trucks. It's a showpiece. They have a career staffing or limited staffing in a volunteer department where only one fire truck's getting out. So you see everything that was on the ladder truck or a ladder truck responsibility moved to the engine or engine tanker or whatever rig's getting out the door. Or you have a non-ladder truck company carrying all the ladder truck stuff because they don't think the ladder truck's reliable, ego, the way they've done it, whatever the reason is, right? I think it's important to keep some of those things on there, even if it's a showpiece. When someone calls for a ladder truck, they're just some general piece of equipment that you should have. Again, ventilation saw, whether that's chainsaw or circular saw, whatever it is, something to cut a ventilation hole into something, access, right? Again, gas powered, battery powered, whatever you want to do, all our options. Access. So we want some sort of saw to cut fences, gates, bars on windows, things like that, right? And different saw blades to carry, fuel, whatever the fuel is, battery or not, to back all that stuff up, and fans. I think one of the biggest things I see that's underrepresented on a ladder truck is ventilation fans. We ran into that in Arlington. We've dropped our fan complement, or changed it, I guess I should say, to different fans. And now we have some of these buildings where, lithium ion is a great one, right? Where lithium ion fire is going to create this, ton of smoke that's hard to move. We've had some power vault issues where there's cold smoke that's lingering. That's very hard to push out of parking garages. Your P5 of a parking garage, 5 levels below the surface, the power's out because the transformer blew down there in this vault. Now we're trying to push all this parking garage air that's just cold, and it's just not going anywhere, right? We need that power, that ventilation, more fans. So I think that's way underrepresented on there. And then any other forcible entry, getting inside or getting people out tools, Stokes basket, things like that. You get in the rescue, rope, some of the other stuff kind of becomes extra, I think, or even just the overhaul, the tarps, the salvage buckets, all that stuff can kind of fit in there in that conversation. I'm talking about like right off the bat, how are we going to save somebody or save ourselves type of equipment. And I think trying to get all that stuff on there, getting a plan for that stuff, and getting it into a usable setup is so important. The saws in a nice spot where they're reachable. You're not reaching over your head. If you jack the truck up, it's not going to put it so it's out of reach. Big one, right? The fans are usually pretty heavy. Making sure they're down low somewhere where they're kind of waist tight and not chest tight. And then again, power, some sort of power supply to power any equipment you put on there, whether it's battery powered to charge it, or it's some sort of generator to power it afterward, right? All that stuff becomes pretty important. Again, every time we tweak a ladder truck spec at Arlington, or I think back to the College Park spec, every little thing that you maneuver, right? You change the number of fans, you add them, you take them away. That changes generator size, that changes the need for a generator. All those things play into that full total picture. So we didn't hit a lot of that stuff hard, but I think that does all deserve to be in that working end of the ladder truck, because that generator's now got to go somewhere, and that's weight, right? Or do we need it or do we not? And it costs. I think that's the biggest thing, is money. And so it plays in that whole picture of that ladder truck and how to spec it.
Right. And, just to finish on that, the cost thing, again, we're down from where you needed that 25, 30 watt generator years ago to run everything, to where maybe a 6 kW generator is gonna be more than enough on your ladder truck at this point, or maybe we don't even need it at this point. But again, you have to evaluate that and think about it. I think to end it, I think the big things, kind of take away from here are like we said before, is you have to figure out the needs of what you want this thing to do, what your community needs, what's around you, and then work from there with that blank piece of paper. I like that. I think that was, one of the key things that got brought up here is you start with that blank piece of paper, and these are what we need, and then we work back from it to get to the big picture.
Yeah,
I think that
I think for that blank piece of paper is just one more point on that. We've worked with people or other, I've done training with people or whatever, and I copied the XYZ neighbor, and we started with their spec and we worked from there out. It happened in Arlington. We've done it in Arlington, where we start from last year's to this year. happened to us in College Park, where we copied the county truck spec that we had in the firehouse and copied it over. That copy paste thing works well if you read every single word of every single paragraph very well. And that 400 pages of the written spec, that becomes very, very, very difficult, and you will probably miss something. Now, when we did it with the engine at College Park, it was easy because we liked a lot of things on the engine. It was a College Park spec engine. We copied and pasted, and we said, all right, these 10 things are the things we want to change. We went into those areas, we changed those 10 things, and we got a good product, right? That makes it pretty easy. When you take neighboring jurisdiction of just the paint scheme, right? Some mechanic somewhere, wanted them to have XYZ oil filter because that's what they stock. Well, now you're in this jurisdiction with a different mechanic. That XYZ oil filter may cost $1,000 extra, and you might not have, the local mechanic might not know how to work on it or stock it. So, you really need to start from that kind of blank piece of paper in that aspect. Use that as a guide for sure, but don't be afraid to do the work. And I think the spec is very intimidating. Speccing is very intimidating and overwhelming. And so that copy paste mentality kind of lingers a little bit. And I get it, right? Because it is a lot of work. But that's where you reach out for help, right? Neighbors and other people, and do the work. It'll pay off for 30 years. That's how.
And to be honest, the copy and paste is one of the most labor intensive, things when you're looking at a truck, because you got to try to pick everything out of it. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of stuff that are hidden in things that you may not see, that even your dealer or your vendor or your salesman might not even know mm-hmm. about. If you're just copy and pasting, there could be things hidden that they don't, they just don't see until you get out there and you're like, well, why is this like, why is this like this, or this like this color, or, why does the ladder do this when I wanted to do this? And it's like, well, it's in the spec. And, again, you just don't know, because you're copy and pasting. So you do have to be really, really careful with that. So.
All right. Well, appreciate you guys listening in today. Again, if you want to check out any of the previous podcasts that we've done, or any other good podcasts out there that kind of talk about emergency equipment or apparatus, fire apparatus, emergency equipment, and /podcasts, or just search podcasts and you'll find them. Again, you can find them on any of your podcast listening devices and save it. And again, appreciate the time to expand out the education. You have any topics, questions, you think you like what we said, you don't like what we said, feel free to reach out. The email address is Nick, N-I-C-K, Wilbur, W-I-L-B-U-R, at evr.solutions. And be happy to have a conversation about it, or maybe give us the next topic for our podcast, and we can bring it up and chat about it. Or you could come on the podcast and we can talk about it all together too. So always enjoy the conversation, and again, thank you, Win, for your time as well today.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thanks, everybody.
This podcast is brought to you by Toyn. Since 1942, Toyn has been building high-quality fire apparatus with a wide range of options that are customized for your unique needs. Toyn is built to take the call. To learn more, visit www.toyn.com.